This is the Tennessee Native Plant Society's Native Plant Seminar Series. And wrapping up our series for the year, again, for our second year, is Margie Hunter. You wrapped us up last year, too.
Yeah.
You were the last seminar of the year, last year. Different topic, but this is a topic she gave that she covered at the, let's see, Nashville Lawn and Garden Show. And it was such a timely topic. I thought, this needs a much wider audience. This would be perfect for our group. And she's going to be talking about beyond the aesthetics, garden as if life depends on it, because it does. There are a lot of folks who are now gardening with native plants. And so we're kind of circling around some of the topics and going deeper into a lot of them now, because so many people are turning to the natives because they're easier to care for. They have fewer requirements that cost money. That, and with the time on our hands when we all got stuck with COVID, a lot of people turned to plants for solace.
Yeah.
I know I did. The plants and all things that feed on them, the birds and insects, butterflies. There's so much wildlife when you have native plants in the yard. It brings in so much wildlife. I'm so appreciative of that. Margie, for those very few of you that probably haven't met her yet, has been a board member of TNPS. She has been a leader with the Tennessee Naturalist Program. She's involved with TNP, the invasive plant group, the TNPS here in Tennessee. How many other things are you involved with? I know you're been doing some research.
Well, I do lead hikes at the Spring Wildflower Pilgrimage. That's been a fun thing that I've done now for, 17 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Has it been that long?
It's been long.
She's also the author of the book, Gardening with Native Plants of Tennessee, The Spirit of Place. And some of you, I'm sure, have that in your collection. If you don't, you need to get it. It's very helpful. I'll put in a plug for you.
Thank you.
So Margie has just been so very, very much involved with native plants and our sense of what Tennessee is in the way of plants. And I'm always amazed at what you can bring up, what you can share. So I think I'm going to back off and shut up and let you have the floor. So welcome, Margie Hunter. And please hold your questions to the end, and Bettina and I will funnel the questions to Margie at the end. That way she can go on through. All right, floor is yours, Margie.
All right, I'm sharing my screen, guys.
Oh, kitty cat.
Yes, yeah, that's little Tucky. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, but nonetheless. All right, guys. So as Karen mentioned, I gave this presentation at the Lawn and Garden Show earlier this year, back in March, and it was a follow-up. So I was trying to figure out a way to present similar information from what I had done in the previous show, but give a different spin to it. And so I came up with this idea. If you were to, the phrase garden as if life depends on it has been used quite a bit in various and sundry ways. For those of you who are familiar with Doug Tallamy, it's a phrase sometimes associated with him and his work. If you're not familiar with Doug Tallamy, you will be before this particular presentation is over. But it's also associated with anything, whether you're vegetable gardening or permaculture or pollinator gardens, et cetera, et cetera. So garden as if life depends on it. And as you can see from the images on the title slide here, wildlife is kind of the focus of the presentation today. So when I gave my other previous presentation to Lawn and Garden, it was on this topic, native plant communities and gardening, looking at gardening from an ecological perspective and how you could do that within a residential landscape. And so as part of that, then I talked about the advantages of using native plant in the garden, the various adaptations that they have to local climate, whether it's with temperature or precipitation, the local soils, local wildlife, and the local plant communities being in balance with everything there, having their roles and their place and so forth. And so the idea then was not so much geographic per se, but the fact that all of these adaptations indicated that it was the evolutionary advantage that native plants have, how they have evolved together with that geographic area, the geology and so forth in the area. So it's not only just place, but it's also everything that has gone into the creation of the biological communities that are in that place. And so that's the evolutionary history and how they have all come about together. And in looking at that and what that kind of evolutionary advantage provides for you, there were several things that we discussed. That not only were they nice for the conditions here within Tennessee, but they would offer greater stability in the landscape, more resilience in the face of change, the ability to conserve resources, the fact that you could use them perhaps with lower maintenance in most instances, that they would provide a nice sense of place. And then in doing all of these things, in addition to that, there were all these wonderful functional services that would come about as you were functioning ecologically with these plants in place. So wildlife habitat, what they can do to help with the improvement of water and air quality, reducing erosion in sites, which then also goes back to water quality, moderating of the temperature to something, and particularly in urban areas, the more vegetation you can bring in, the less you are sweating and hot all the time. Carbon sink, something very important with what's happening with climate change, so forth. Noise abatement. If you've ever been in an area where there aren't many plants and how noisy it is, plants are very good at absorbing sound. And then just a general connection to nature. A lot of people have been learning about the Japanese term Shinrin-yoku, forest air bathing, where going out in nature can be such a benefit to us physiologically. Not only just mental stress reduction and relaxation, but also lowering your blood sugar, lowering blood pressure, etc. So it's a very, very helpful thing to have this nature connection. But the thing we're truly going to focus on, again, is the idea of wildlife habitat as being one of those important functional services. So when we look at Tennessee, there's a lot of biodiversity here, not only of our plants, but also of our animals, the vertebrate animals and invertebrate animals that we have here in the state, because of our positioning within the eastern United States, because of the vast variation in the landscape and topography from one end of Tennessee to the other. We have a tremendous number of plants and animals that are here in the state that we can enjoy and help protect and be glad to have as part of us. But we also need to look at it from a perspective of that biodiversity in terms of, are we taking care of it? Because the more diversity you have, the more resilient everything is going to be. So there was a study recently done looking at areas where land has been appropriately conserved. There's been lots of conservation of areas. And then, though, areas where there are lots of special plants. You were talking about, Karen, the endemics that we have, 14 or 15 endemics in Tennessee. So these endemic plants that are very limited in where they are found, very specific to a certain place or a certain habitat, and therefore then are vulnerable if there are great changes taking place to their habitat or anything in the area. So conservation is important with these endemic species. So this guy was looking at basically filtering those two things on top of one another and seeing where the gaps were. And so the gaps between conservation and vulnerability of species were in three major places along the West Coast, in Texas, and virtually the entire Southeast. So as he drilled down with specific groups of organisms, so he looked at bird diversity. They're really concentrated, as you can see, along coastlines, because that's where a lot of your shorebirds and other water birds are. And so that greatly increases the diversity in those areas. Mammal endemics. I found this one to be very fascinating because it's really, the Southeast is just loaded with mammal endemics. About 15 different species down in there. But I find it interesting from a couple of perspectives. If you think back, you know about your geologic history, you can trace one of those lines there that where it's kind of the darkest red that comes down through South Carolina, Georgia, across Alabama, and then dips up and catches West Tennessee. That line right in through there kind of mimics the Mississippi embayment. Where the seas came back in and during the Cenozoic and were there for about, 25, 30 million years. So I find that interesting and fascinating. And then also what's above in the north is almost non-existent. And so that perhaps would indicate that later glaciations have an impact on the fact that there aren't very many mammal endemics to the north. So I'd love to drill deeper into this particular one and see what it is, and also figure out what some of those species are. I would imagine most of them are small, like, mice or shrews or voles or something like that. But the Florida panther could also be, one of those species, perhaps. And we're all familiar with the phrase that the Southern Appalachians are the salamander capital of the world. Well, here is proof positive in a blue, yellow, and red. So that red is right on top of the Southern Appalachians and virtually nowhere else throughout the entire globe. So salamanders are certainly very, very key to our area and particularly the Southeast. And then if you look at fish diversity, talk about being able to trace something, you can almost trace the Tennessee River down through here, coming down through East Tennessee into northern Alabama and then up through between Middle Tennessee and West Tennessee. And if you're talking about fish diversity, you also have to include mussel diversity, because mussels during the very early stage of their existence, after the mama mussel shoots those babies out, they have to latch onto a fish and basically parasitize a fish for a short period of time till it gets to the point where they're ready to go out on their own, and then they'll drop off and continue living their life free and independent. But being associated with fish is extremely important. And with some species of mussels, they're very specific as to which fish they are going to have to parasitize. So as your fish species decline, your mussel species will also decline. And they've already taken a hit with dams and so forth anyway. So all of these things just really become very, very much tied in together. And then, of course, plants. So I imagine a couple of these are going to be on the endemic list anyway. So the Central Basin, so things like our Tennessee coneflower, Tennessee milkvetch, and Nashville breadroot. And then in the Southern Appalachians. So these are two areas that overlap Tennessee in particular. And then there's that one little area, they call it the tag, Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia, that nexus where they come together. And so there's some special things there. I know there's at least 2 species, I think, of clematis in that area that are unique. So there are a lot of endemic plants as well to take into consideration with this. So in addition to plants, we have to look at things like other species groups. So let's take a look at birds for a few minutes. There was a study that came out in 2019. Many of you may have seen it and read it. It got a lot of press attention at the time. So there was a study that looked at surveys that had been done over the last 50 years from 1970 to 1920 that looked at, estimated, and surveyed the breeding bird populations within the United States, North America. And what they found was between 70 and 2020 that we lost 3 billion birds. It was just an amazing amount of breeding population birds that had decreased during that time period. So significant loss, nearly 30% of our birds have disappeared in time period. And so the lead author, Kenneth Rosenberg, indicated that this was a strong signal that our human-altered landscapes are losing their ability to support bird life. And he goes on to say that extinction begins with a loss in abundance of individuals that can result in compositional and functional changes in the ecosystems. And so what he's saying here is that the more individuals that drop out, the more species become compromised, the more the function of the system becomes compromised, to the point where perhaps it begins to collapse. And we've certainly gotten enough dire warnings from the folks that work with the climate scientists in terms of, we are on the brink. And if we don't step back and step back fast, things are going to happen. And this is just one more indication here with the birds that we're pushing this envelope much further than it needs to go. And so in looking at the types of birds that have suffered from this, you see that the different groups and how they have declined, particularly our grassland birds. My gosh, the grassland birds have just, the bottom has fallen out of those. But even some that are pretty common that you will find in your backyard bird feeders, like purple finch, the grackle, towhee, white-throated sparrow. I was hearing those. They've just now kind of come back into my yard. They usually show up in the wintertime here. And I've been hearing that, oh, Sam, buddy. So they're showing up right now, but they're declining. And the biggest declines in birds have been those that eat insects. And so is there a connection there? Probably so. So if we were to look at and determine about the sort of the relative numbers of different species of life on Earth, this kind of gives you a graphic way of seeing how important our insects are, our invertebrate arthropod or jointed leg species are. So there are 5 to 7 million of these species globally, versus if you look below, it's little, it's left leg there, left front leg, you'll see a little deer, moose, elk, whatever it is, 6,500 mammal species. Well, we're one of those versus 5.7 million insect species. I mean, we are less than like flatworms. Okay, there are more species of flatworms than there are mammals out there. So, relatively speaking, we're kind of middling. And but insects, there are a lot of them out there, and they kind of drive the world in many instances. And so considering that is important, and not just looking at it from a standpoint of species, but looking at it from the standpoint of their biomass. So if you were to take all of the insects and kind of actually to do biomass, you have to dry them out and get their dry weight without moisture. But if you then dry weighted all of us, okay, if you look over on the far left-hand side, you see that little grayed out human there. Well, that's us. And then you go over and you see that rather scary looking, if you're an arachnophobe, spider, and you see that there are 17 times more biomass of insects than there are of humans, and then 7,500 more times biomass of the plants. And so when we continue this presentation, we're going to be focusing on that and the insects that eat on those plants, because they are, in essence, the base of the food web. So plants manufacture their own food, and as a result of that, they basically feed everything else, because something either has to eat a plant or it has to eat something that has eaten a plant in order to live. Plants are what they call autotrophs, self-feeding, because they can manufacture their food. No other organisms are. They have to eat something that has eaten the plant. For that energy from the sun due to photosynthesis that moves on up through that food web, the flow of energy, to get to us, it starts with plants. And then one of the main levels above that then for continuing that flow of energy are going to be the arthropods. They are an essential link in there. Now, they're only exhibited there by a spider and a grasshopper and a cutworm. So this is not really displaying the value of that level, but they're extremely important, getting from the autotrophs onto the rest of us that need to feed on other things. So what's happening with those insects? Well, like the birds, it ain't good. There was a study done by David Wagner and other lead authors in 2021. So he too was looking globally and determining what's out there, looking at all the different papers that had been written by people on insect populations and what was happening with those insect populations. And in putting all of that information together, what he found is that declines are global, they're worldwide. And there's not just one single issue going on here. There are a myriad of issues that are responsible for the decline in our insect species. And so he termed the paper Death by 1,000 Cuts, because all these different things were conspiring to basically just really begin to depress the populations and undercut the success of our insects. Many of those listed across the top there are associated with climate change. So things like the disruption of ranges, increased fire, increased storm intensity, just the basic warming of the temperatures, and then increased drought. All of those things are taking a toll. But then these other things, deforestation, insecticides, the way we do agriculture, urbanization, introduced species that can cause so many problems, your invasives, and then pollution. And all of these things, climate change and all of these others, there's only one responsible party, okay? And it's us. We are behind all of this stuff. And if anything's going to change, it's going to have to be us that makes that change. We're the ones that are going to have to do that. So I'm assuming the majority of you are familiar with Dr. Talamy. He's a entomologist and wildlife ecologist at the University of Delaware. He's written several very popular books, the first of which came out, I think, in either 2007 or 2008. It's called Bringing Nature Home. And it took the gardening world by storm, because it just basically gets you to thinking about things from an ecological perspective. And instead of looking at insects as the enemy that you need to kill because they're chewing on your plants, you understand how valuable and important they are to the rest of that food web, and realize that your native plants are the basis that helps to support all of that. So it's really kind of a revolutionary way of thinking about gardening that really, I think, changed a lot of people's perspective about things. So he has followed that up with other books that basically say a lot of the same things, presents that same kind of message, whether it's Nature's Best Hope or his a collaboration with Rick Dark on The Living Landscape. Again, looking at the importance of supporting a biodiversity of other wildlife out there and what that means not only for that wildlife, but ultimately for us as well. And so one of his important messages here is talking about invertebrates. Since he's an entomologist, that's kind of his thing. And so he particularly wants to look at these invertebrates and their relationship to birds. Why? Because when birds have babies, they feed those babies invertebrates. They feed them worms and spiders and insects. Why? Well, because the young have to have that. They need it. These things are loaded with protein, and those baby birds, in order to develop their flight feathers, in order to develop the chest muscles to move their wings and fly, that requires a great deal of protein. And so that protein is essential for a growing baby bird to get to a certain point so it can fledge successfully. So as he found out, insects contain more protein than beef. So these songbirds have to have it. 96%, as you can see here, of our terrestrial bird species rear their young on insects. One clutch of chickadees with the mama chickadee and the daddy chickadee. Mommy and daddy have to work very hard to raise that one nest. They have to get in or somewhere around 7,500 different caterpillars in order to raise those babies. So if you thought getting up in the middle of the night once or twice with your young'un was tiring when you had kids, by golly, imagine having to feed your babies 4 to 12 times per hour, which is what the birds have to do. And as a result of that, even some of the bird species that would normally feed on other things, be it seeds or fruit or other, even fish, other things, often will feed on insects as well, because they need that additional energy and protein during the breeding season. But then there are those insects that are those birds that are exclusive insectivores. They just feed exclusively on insects. So our swallows, martins, swifts, nighthawks, etc. So how are some of our species doing? Well, a study in 2014 shows that the majority of them are decreasing in some way or other. We've lost over 60% of our beetles. We're nearing 50% of our ants, bees, and wasps. Butterflies are about 30% that are decreasing. These are populations that are species that are in decline, the species that are declining. So with our dragonflies and damselflies, about 20%, a fifth of the species are in decline in that group. And then look at the poor grasshopper. You know, I don't know if you've ever had a soft spot for grasshoppers or not. I never really have, but shoot, sure makes you feel so sorry for them now. Because I mean, virtually they're all on the decline. Almost 100% of them are declining. So what do they do? I mean, again, as gardeners, we often look at insects as the enemy, something that we have to fight. But many of these insects are important pollinators. Many of these insects eat other insects, so they are responsible for pest control. Some of them, some of our invertebrates, of course, are involved in process of decomposition, those that live in the soil, and therefore involved in nutrient transfer. So breaking up and demineralizing some of the things in the ground so that those nutrients are available for trees to uptake, and then just being nutritious themselves and getting eaten and passing that nutrition on into the food web. So they're just a really critical part of that function of the food web. And we don't want that to collapse because we're kind of at the top of that food web. And so if it starts to go, we got a long way to fall. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that and look at some studies in particular that have focused on this food web function. So Talamy and a lot of his students coming out of the University of Delaware have looked at various species, native species of plants, and how many herbivorous species. So these are foliage eaters. They actually eat the leaves. And so they've looked at that, which tree species in particular, some shrubs, but also some mostly tree species, are regularly eaten by how many different kinds of species. And what they found was that the king of the hill was our oats, the Quercus genus. They would have more than 20% of the species that they supported. So lots and lots and lots of the species, 20% of them, at some point in time, feed on one or more species of oats. And then it just kind of goes down from there. But willows and cherries and birch and poplar, all of these are still way up there on the list. And then you get on down to, you know, basswood and spruce and pine. And then all the others down at the bottom are a lot of our other plants. Now, this doesn't mean that, oh, gee, only 2 or 3 herbivorous insects chew on this. That doesn't mean that it's not a good plant, because maybe it provides nectar, maybe it provides pollen, maybe it provides fruit. So there are other metrics by which you can judge the value of any particular plant. But just looking at it from a standpoint of foliage-eating insects. So you're talking about your caterpillars and the larval stage for these things. The king of the hill is the oak. A little further, go into a little more detail and actually tie it into particular species of birds, because birds eat caterpillars. And so how does this work in terms of all those caterpillars and species that are feeding on native plants versus non-native plants that many of those species do not feed on? And so they began doing a study looking at areas where there were almost no native plants, almost 100% non-native versus 100% native. So the 0 on the left-hand side means 100% native, okay? And then as you move across 25, 50, 75, 100, you're decreasing the amount of native plant biomass and increasing the non-native species that are there. So they wanted to look at 3 things: reproduction and the survival of both the adults and of the juveniles. And what they found was, especially with bird species, because birds fly, that the adult and juvenile survival really weren't affected at all by this, because they can move around. Once the babies fledge, they're not stuck in an area where there's all non-native species. They can move around. But what they did find was that it had a strong impact on reproduction. And so what they found was that 85% of the foraging of these chickadees was on native species, and only 15% of the foraging was on non-native species. And they looked at various from Zelkovia, which is totally not native, all the way up to that famous Quercus genus, and where you don't have any with Zelkovia, there were no species of caterpillars recorded on those plants, versus Quercus, where they found 532 different species of caterpillar feeding on the oaks. And of course, that's where the preference was. I mean, if you're going to go to the grocery store looking for food and the shelves are empty in one place, you're going to leave there and you're going to go somewhere else where the shelves have some supplies so that you can get the groceries that you need. And so with the native trees, there were 2 to 3 times greater abundance and 5 times more diversity of insect or caterpillar species that were there with those. So naturally, the chickadees are going to flock to something like that. Another study that they did kind of in conjunction with this was again looking at comparing a place that had mostly non-native species versus a place that had mostly native species. So again, the 0 on the bottom part, the 0 means it's 100% native species, and the 100% means 0 native species, none whatsoever. And so in plotting all the data, as they were looking through that grayed area that you see is kind of where most of the data points showed up, was in that gray area. And then they ran the solid black line is kind of the mean average of those data sets. The dotted line across there is the replacement. What that means is that if you've got so many native plants in your yard or in the area, then the greater the chance is that mama chickadee and daddy chickadee will raise at least 2 chicks successfully to replace them. So, and then anything above that line, the population is growing. Anything below that dotted line, the population is decreasing. And so you can see that throughout most of it, where it's primarily non-native species, populations are going to decrease because there's just not the food supply there to be able to support successful fledging of these birds. So the first point that a lot of people want to look at, and some people have focused on, is this point, where that gray area, the first bit of some of the data sets begin to hit that replacement line, and this is 30%. So you've got 70% of your area is native and 30% is non-native. So the goal then would be to have no more than 30% non-native species in your yard, 70% native species, and then you might be successful in having mama chickadee and daddy chickadee replaced by their babies. So that's where it begins to become possible. But another area to look at is this one. And that's where the mean average actually hits the replacement line. And that's 6%. And so what that means is you can only have 6% non-native species in your yard. 94% needs to be native in order to, at least from a mean average perspective, make sure that the population is at least remaining stable and not decreasing. So when mean estimates fall below replacement, you're looking at anything less than 94% native species, which is that's kind of surprising, really, when you think of that. Who would have thought that you would need that many? But a lot of people focus on that 30%, and so they think, okay, and some places are even putting that in like some of their municipal, I guess. Well, I don't know what you call it. They're not necessarily rules or anything like that, but they're encouraging people and using that as a benchmark to try to have no more than 30% non-native species in your yard and 70% native species. They're focused on that 30%. And so if you're trying to look at that and determine how would you gauge that visually, it's not easy to do. So I think it's kind of nice to look at it from a perspective of a functioning household. So if you're trying to look for that functioning ecosystem where you're perhaps getting to the point where your chickadees can replace themselves and have a stable population, you want a functioning ecosystem. Well, that functioning ecosystem is the same thing as a functioning household. In fact, echo is the Greek word for household. It comes from oikos, the Greek word for household. And in the Greek world, oikos, or household, basically encompasses the home, the yard, the people, everything in it, extended family, everything gets included in the term oikos for household. So if we're going to look at this from the standpoint of the household, then you got to have your house, you got to have your yard, you got to have appliances, you got to have furniture, you got to have some of the things that kind of make a home a little bit more homey, and got to be able to see, you've got to be able to cook. So these are the kinds of things that you need to have in order to have a successful place where you can live and raise your family, right? So this would be the equivalent, looking at it from this perspective, of native plants in your yard. So then what's the equivalent of the non-native, whether you're going 30% or somewhere less than that, all the way to that 6% of the non-native species? So non-native are going to be some of the things you would just for decorative value, you know, maybe a little splash of color, a little splash of texture, a little splash of fun. And so things like seasonal color. You want those daffodils? Put them in. There's nothing like looking at daffodils in early spring. Grandma's peonies, can't live without them. Go for it. They're beautiful. And even some of the non-native species that are very popular in perennial gardens and others, they have a long period of flowering. They're very supportive of pollinators, and they bring extra color and texture into the garden. As long as they're not invasive, that's fine, man, go for it. So these are the kinds of things then that you can bring in to give a little extra color, a little extra texture, a little extra seasonality and life to the garden to kind of spruce up and give a little extra to that overall household that we have. And of course, if you're going to plant a tree, there's no better tree to plant and for your household than an oak. Fortunately, we have 23 different species of oaks in the state of Tennessee, so lots to choose from. They can go in various and different kinds of habitats, so from very dry to very wet. So look for the different oaks. We have the red oak group and we have the white oak group, and they do function in quite beautiful ways. And it's nice to have them in the yard. And Dr. Talamy, one of the latest books that he has come out with is The Nature of Oaks. And he not only talks about it from a standpoint of the food web, but he also brings it in and just caterpillars. So he brings in all kinds of other ways in which oaks function and operate and do their thing and support a much larger web of life within our yards and within nature in general. So they're pretty good. So you might be thinking, well, if oaks are great and maybe cherries are good, okay, gosh, yeah, well, but what about that Japanese cherry, or what about the sawtoothed oak? Yes, they come from other places, but it's a cherry and it's an oak, and they're in the exact same genus. So if it's Quercus, isn't that okay? And the answer is kind of, well, a little, but not as much as you might think. And so they actually did studies looking at these closely related but non-native species that have genera in the United States. Our native genera, the non-native genera in the same genus, and they call them congeners. That's the term for it. So the sawtoothed oak, for example, is a congener to our native oak species. Both are Quercus, but one of them, again, evolved elsewhere and is being brought over here. So does that make a difference? And they found that yes, actually it does. So they found that there was lower herbivore species that chew on the leaves, diversity overall, fewer insect species overall, not just the leaf chewers, fewer specialists. Specialists are insects that only have maybe one species or one genus that they're associated with, and they don't eat a lot of different things. They're very focused on a very narrow, they have a very limited diet. And so there are very fewer specialists because, again, if they're specialists, they're probably going to be specialists on something they evolved with here, as opposed to something being brought in from other parts of the world. 40% fewer caterpillars, 50% fewer species overall in doing these studies. And so the lack of shared evolutionary history is the primary reason for this. And so what that meant was that those that did feed on it, and some did, there's fewer, but not none. So those that did feed on it, however, they grew at a much slower rate. They did not achieve the same size as those that would feed on native species, so they were smaller species. They died at a much higher rate, there higher mortality associated with those, so fewer of them survived. And once they had emerged from the egg, fewer of them were able to mature completely. And what this indicates then is that their fitness and their reproduction is compromised when they feed off of these congeners as opposed to true native plants with whom they have evolved, with which they have evolved. So yes, you can get some chickadee food off of a sawtoothed oak, but it's going to be smaller. And therefore, your chickadees are going to be smaller, or that mama and daddy's going to have to work twice as hard to get those 7,500 caterpillars in order to feed that clutch. If you want to know more about the kinds of species that some need, what kinds of plants they use for their larval food sources, there are two excellent resources to go to. So David Wagner's Caterpillars of Eastern North America and our very own Rita Venables, Butterflies of Tennessee, will list the larval food sources necessary in order to get butterflies and moths up to the point where they can actually become adult butterflies and moths. So what do they need as a larval food source, that herbivore to eat? And so these will give you that information. Typically, talking more from a generic standpoint, like elm or maple or oak, they won't give you specific species, but they will tell you which genus, which basic group is good for any particular individual insect. And caterpillars are great, but we need to think about a lot of our other species as well. So bees and wasps are very important pollinators, and they need our native plants just as much as butterflies do. They feed on the nectar, they feed on the pollen, and use that to feed and support their babies. So, and this is more than just the non-native honeybee. We're talking our native bee species. I think the overwhelming vast majority, if not all of our native species, bee species, are solitary. And so to being able to support those. And then the wasps as well. Most of them, the overwhelming vast majority of them, are solitary as well, and they're not stingers. So it's only those that are social, and they're just a handful of species that are social that then defend their nest. And so they're the wasps that are going to sting you. So I think we've gotten sort of programmed to hear the word wasp and go, get out the bug spray. But we shouldn't do that because there are many good, hundreds of good wasps that are not stinging wasps, but that are very good pollinators and that need our support as well. Whole part of that food web, the arthropod food web. Heather Holm wrote these books on bees and wasps. I don't like people throwing around the word expert because oftentimes they throw it around about people who really aren't. But if I was going to be tempted to call anybody an expert, I would call Heather Holm an expert on bees and wasps. I've heard her speak on those. She's given presentations for wild ones, and it's remarkable, just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And then her book on pollinators of native plants and helping you to understand which plants are very supportive of these pollinators. There are certain plants at certain times of year that queen bees need. It's very critical to them. And so having those plants and having them available during that time of year when the queen bees need them, things like this that I had never thought of and never realized were important. So, we love our butterflies, but these other things need our help and attention as well. And native plants serve them too. In addition, other things that are insect eating are tricolored bats. All of our bat species are insectivores. And so there's a little tricolored bat there. Gray squirrels, you know, you just think of them as pests on your bird feeder going after your black oil sunflower seeds. But they eat insects too. You know, protein's important to them, and they get it not just from the nuts, but from insects too. And then salamanders. Those salamanders need to have that as well. So other insectivorous wildlife. So there are kind of four main points here. And that is that the evolutionary history of our native plants enhances the function of our food web throughout that food web. So not only just in terms of the insects immediately above it, but everything else then that comes beyond in that food web, that wonderful matrix of energy flow through the system. There are some native plants that support these interspecies connections more so than others. So you go back to Ptolemy's list where oaks were the king, and then you talk about cherries and willows and things and so forth. So some of them are extremely important to a wider diversity of species. So you see the black cherry leaf here, and can you spot that red spotted purple caterpillar, the larva there, that looks like a big chunk of bird poo. And so much so, resembling so much so, you see like the white, urea in there. And then you see what looks like two seeds that have been depulped after going through the bird's gut and getting pooped out there on the back of it. So, I mean, that's really going to extreme to mimic some poo right there. And they're very successful at it. And so, I mean, who wants to eat bird poo? So it's a great way to avoid getting eaten. So our caterpillars are great. Looking at our foliage feeders, it's important to support them. But again, that's not the only food source, excuse me, that we need to think about. So pollen, nectar, and fruit are also important with our native plants. And then non-natives. They're not all ecological wastelands. And so bringing in a few of those, having some of them, it's okay. Again, the peonies, daffodils, the sage, those kinds of things that are not problematic, they're fine. They are fine. It's okay. But you do need to use caution. You do need to know what the plant is. You need to know whether or not it has been observed behaving in an invasive manner. If it has tendencies, certain characteristics that might make it invasive. And one species, pardon me for just 1 second. Thank you. One species that I know, there's one lady that loves to say mimosa's fine. There's nothing wrong with mimosa. It's great. It only gets in disturbed places. You don't have to worry about it. It's okay. And so, but it's not. It's an invasive, and it's a bad invasive. And I'll tell you a very quick story. So in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, they were noticing mimosas showing up along Little River. So you know Gatlinburg is, and if you're headed down from Gatlinburg, get into the Smoky Mountains past Sugarlands Visitor Center, and you're headed down towards Elkmont, and then eventually on to Case Cove. Well, when you get to Elkmont, Little River comes from the Smokies Crest, flows down through the Elkmont campground, and then flows out along Little River Road and goes out through Townsend. Sorry. Right there. What they found was that along the Little River corridor coming out of Elkmont is all these mimosa seedlings, 12,000 that they found and pulled out of there before they discovered the one parent plant that was growing up there near the old Wonderland Hotel at Elkmont. And once they removed that, they didn't have a difficulty anymore. So those that will tell you that they're not problematic in areas that are not disturbed are wrong. They are problematic everywhere. And our disturbed areas butt up right next to our pristine areas. So it's really hard to distinguish. There's not much of a buffer left anymore with any of these places. So yes, mimosa is a problem. Mimosa also brought over its own pest, the mimosa webworm, which is great. let it chew on mimosas, but it also chews on honey locust, which is one of our native trees. And honey locust, it also produces a nice edible fruit that our wildlife love. It's delicious, yum, yum. But the fruit of the mimosa is toxic and it can kill you, kill anything that eats it, the wildlife or, browsers, grazers that might try to eat it. So yes, that little mimosa webworn caterpillar is something that a chickadee could get a tasty bite of, but it's certainly not worth all the damage that comes along with it. Another one to think about is our nandina. So it's been planted a lot, and it is one of those that's beginning to show up in forested areas quite readily. The little seedlings that you see in the middle lower part of the screen, those were photographed at Cedars of Lebanon State Park in one of their trails, backcountry trails. So these seedlings were pooped out by birds who eat it and then drop it. So this particular plant is, all parts of it are toxic. It's got toxic alkaloids in it and a cyanide as well. So all parts of it are toxic. Domestic animals can't eat it. If they do, it will cause severe distress, if not death. The only thing that does eat this, no foliage feeders certainly, scale and spider mites, the only thing it will attract. I don't think you really want to attract that to your yard. But the main reason why this is so bad is because some of our bird species, like cedar waxwings, that like to sit in one area and just gorge berry after berry after berry after berry, they will gorge so much on these fruits that it builds up to a toxic level in their crop, inside their bodies, and it will kill them. It proves fatal. The toxins just get to a fatal level and will kill them. And they found dead cedar waxwings. They cut them open to see what may have happened, and the crops are full of nandina fruit. So if you want to be able to feed your cedar waxwings and your robins and mockingbirds and bluebirds that like to have fruit like that, then our native winterberry is the way to go. And so that's what's going on here with this one cedar waxwing in my backyard, chowing down on some of the native winterberry that's out there. So ecologically speaking, what do you want to do in your garden? Well, plant native species. Hopefully that's become pretty clear at this point. Then eliminate chemicals, because it's not going to help. If you truly want to garden ecologically, by having a wide diversity of native species in your yard, you are not only going to pull in things that are going to chew on your plants, you're going to pull in things that chew on your plants and pull in things that are going to eat the things that are chewing on your plants, whether it's chickadee mama and daddies feeding their babies or lots of other things that are going to chow down on the things chowing down on your plant. And studies have been done in Dr. Talamy's first book, Bringing Nature Home. He cites studies where they've done that if you've got a nice, diverse, ecologically functioning system in your yard, then the damage done by those that eat your foliage remains below the level that you even notice it, because other things are coming in and controlling them. It's called nature's checks and balances. And so when you garden ecologically, you're bringing that in. You're taking advantage of all of that evolutionary history with these plants and the animals associated with these plants, so that they know how to work together and establish that nice sort of a balance, so that nothing gets out of hand and you don't even see it, much less ever be tempted to go in the garage and pull out some kind of pesticide or anything of that nature. So you can eliminate chemicals. You don't have to worry about that. And certainly if you want to promote wildlife in your yard, you don't want to spray with insecticides. And then of course, be willing to tolerate some of that insect herbivory, because there's something beautiful out there that's going to come from that particular caterpillar. So the giant swallowtail, for example, here chowing down on the hop tree. And at the Lawn and Garden Show, the Tennessee Native Plant Society joins forces with the Naturalist Program, the TNPS, and the Middle Tennessee Wild Ones chapter. We share a pair of booths because our missions are the same and our messages are the same. And so we complement each other well. And so we all are there together. And during this presentation, at the end of this presentation, I encouraged everybody to come to our booth and get more information about some of these things, because all of our sites and all the information and things that we produce as organizations are all, just fit together beautifully, hand in glove. And so if you're looking for more information, perhaps on native plants that you could use as substitutes to invasive species, go to the TNPS website, tnipc.org. There's a landscaping tab, and there are brochures. You can download them, all kinds of information that you can access for free on our website. We promote the use of native plants big time at TNPS and want people to consider that. And we have the listing of those species that are invasive in the state of Tennessee. So you will know which ones to avoid. If you're considering maybe burning bush, for example, hopefully you're not. But if you are, then you'll go, oops, that's becoming invasive. It's showing up in the forest. I've seen it in the wild numerous times at Cedars of Lebanon, at Frozen Heads State Natural Area and State Park. And so, jerking those things up out of the ground and making note of the fact that they're getting into these areas. So, but there are suggestions, native plants that would be good substitutes for some of these. If you like the fall color, or if you like the form or whatever. And most of our plants, based on everything you've seen here, it should be pretty makes sense then that most of these native alternatives are also going to be far more attractive to our native wildlife than any of the non-native species, ornamental species that you might be tempted to put in your yard. So that's it. Are there any questions?
Yes, there are a few. Not a lot, but there are a few. Let's see if I can. There we go. Are there some good native plants? Whoops. Are there some good native plants I can plant for moths in order to support bat populations? I think
Well,
if Rita's still on here, she might be able to help with that too. Between
Yeah.
the two of you, I'm sure we'll come up with some.
Well, moths and butterflies are in the same group, Lepidoptera. And when Doug Tallamy did his study, he studied Lepidoptera. So it's both. So if you are planting things that are, and the Wagner book also has moths in it, not just butterflies. So those, if you are attracting butterfly larvae, you're probably attracting moth as well. So the same species are going to be useful, I would think. Now, there may be some that are a little bit more attractive to a certain species of moth than another, and that's where David's book would come in handy if you want to attract, a tulip tree beauty or an oak beauty or woolly bears or whatever. There might be certain ones that you want to focus on for that, but just in general, moth species are going to be lepidopterans, and that's the same group, same order as butterflies. So the plants that support butterflies are probably going to support moths in general. And Bart, would you agree with that? Rita, if you're still there.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yes, I'm here. I think yes, I agree with you. I think what he's talking about are how to attract night flying moths in the adult stage for bats to eat. And I would say just look for, of course you have to have the larval food source to have the adult moths. So, I don't really know plants that bloom at night that might or would be blooming at night that moths go to.
Oh, I know one.
Okay, go for it.
The Manfreda virginica fall sallow, or also called rattlesnake master.
Okay.
It flowers at night and it has a very strong perfume. Also, the Spanish bayonet, the
yucca.
yucca filamentosa. Those are night pollinating by moths because they're the white flowers.
There are some primroses too that might fit there. The evening blooming primroses.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that moths would go to, but I would guess they would.
Yes,
Yeah, large
it
fruit.
is. I think they're the pollinator, actually.
Yes, sphinx moths, I think, are the pollinators
Yeah,
for
I think so.
the big one, the Missouri primrose or the big fruit primrose,
Yes.
big yellow one that's in the glades.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So other than that, I guess just turn the lights on and then turn them off real quick.
You can also, no, there is a way to attract them. So, and you can look it up online. There's a formula of something with like beer and beer will attract all kinds of things, but beer and different fruits that have kind of fermented and maybe a few other things, and you just make this big slurry, and then you paint it on tree bark, and that will attract moths to come in and feed off of that. So you can look that up online.
Sure.
Is
Let's
that
see.
healthy for them, or does it turn them into alcoholics?
I have a 12-step program for moths. I don't know.
I've actually seen drunk birds before.
I've seen drunk wasps. They get drunk on some of the nectar on some of the plants. Was it, I guess, the angelica, I think, can make them kind of a, ooh, yeah.
I saw some birds who'd eaten fermented wild grapes, and they tried to land on a fence, a nice white fence, and they couldn't stick their landings.
Right. Well, any other questions?
Rita had a question. Would you like to ask it yourself, Rita? Because I know you corrected yourself.
Did myself again. Yeah, you mentioned, okay, that I typed in the wrong thing. Of course, we want to have more than 30% native species in our yard, but does that mean, so just the percentage of native species, does that mean number of species, individuals of certain species, or the total biomass?
I think they did the biomass.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, totally.
Might have covered that and I just missed it.
Yeah, yeah. So that 30% is 30% non-natives.
Non-native, yeah, that's what I'm.
70% natives.
Yes.
So,
I tried to change that and it wouldn't let me on here, so I
okay.
don't want to be confusing. So I had to type an apology in there. But anyway, yeah, so diversity is not as important as total biomass then.
Well, no, I would say they're both equally important.
Okay.
I mean, you don't want a whole bunch of the same thing. You want as much difference, particularly if you're going to attract wildlife. You know, you want things that are going to be flowering at different times, setting fruit at different times. You're going to want flowering plants, you're going to want shrubs, you're going to want trees, you're going to want a wide diversity of all kinds of things throughout the seasons. And so I think the diversity of what you bring in, from my perspective, is just as important as the quantity, the biomass quantity. So I would say both things are equally important from that perspective.
Okay.
Other comments? Amazing presentation as always, thanks. And common milkweed is good for monarchs and a moth species. Evening primrose attracts primrose moth. Oak leaves feed polyphemus moth, and they are nocturnal. Excuse me, she meant oak leaves feed the caterpillars of the polyphemus moth. If anybody has additional questions, please unmute yourself and ask away. This is your chance. Any other questions? We're open. If there's no more questions, wonderful, Margie. I always learn from your presentations.
Thank you.
Bob Davis, what about zinnias? They last long and many species use them.
Sure. I mean, that's the same thing that I was talking about, like with the sage and the bringing in like the non-native sage. So zinnias are fine. Again, just make sure that whatever you're bringing in does not have any kind of invasive baggage associated with it. And so by looking at the TNPS list and not even just TNPS sometimes, but maybe if you're down like near the Alabama border, look at the Alabama list. What's invasive there? So sometimes our bordering states, it can be just as important to look at what their invasive species lists are too. So, but yeah, I mean, something like that, sure. Some of the animals.
We now have the beginnings of a gardening page, gardening with native plants page on our website. And there are links there to the TNPS brochures for different parts of the state and the invasive list as well. So if you don't want to go to TNPS, it can get difficult sometimes finding what you're looking for on the TNPS site. At least I find it sometimes a little.
Really? Well, just to get, when you get on the home page, look at for the landscaping tab, hit that landscaping tab, and it's all right there.
Now you have two places to go to get them.
Yeah.
And you can find whatever interests you among that group and just go ahead and print it out and you'll have it available.
Absolutely, because there are a lot of other things that we do have on there that people might find of interest as well, that are related to native plants. So
there's a request for the repeat of the website for plant recommendations. You can go to tnps.org or tnipc. Is it org?
Org.
Both will have the material.
That's correct.
This presentation has been recorded. It will be available later in the week on the TNPS website under presentations, under seminars. So if you want to check out certain parts of it, it'll be available then. Kay Matthews says, thank you, Margie. Outstanding presentation. If you're interested in becoming bird sanctuary certified, visit, and she's got it listed in the chat. It's the habitatconnection.org/bird-sanctuary-certification. There's also National Wildlife Federation has certification. There's Smart Yard certification here in Tennessee. There's Bee City certification. There's Monarch certification. There are a lot of ways you can certify your native plant area.
Have more signs in your yard than you will plants.
Certified. Try and do them all.
Yeah.
But you have an option there to find one of them that you like the sign of. Sure. Sign up with them and then put one in your yard to at least people know what's going on. Sometimes that's the way to say, excuse the mess. We're feeding the butterflies and the bees, you know. When you explain to people what's going on, sometimes they're a little bit more tolerant.
Yeah, true.
And it's an opening for educating them.
But there are also ways to make it look really nice too. So
yes.
Yes.
My project for this fall is eliminating a large part of my front lawn. I have a very, very large front lawn and lots of trees, and I generate lots of leaves. And so I'm using the leaves this year to create a section of the front lawn that's going to be reforested. So it already has large trees in it, but I'm going to add understory trees and of course all natives. But the leaves look very messy, of course, and I live in a neighborhood where it has very manicured yards.
Yeah.
However, my justification will be that along the edges and around the sides, there will be a very trim lawn that's well cared for. So that will look like the landscaped area. But then I also think, and this is a question, what about leaf litter, leaving it where you can? Doesn't that also provide a big habitat for insects?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, the leaf litter. And if you can, this is the part where maybe it gets a little messy. during the wintertime, leaving some of the dead stalks and so forth, because bees will often get in there
Yeah.
and have their
Mhm.
home in there, and other wildlife will overwinter in like standing dead grasses and other things of that nature. And so not to be too much of a neat freak, kind of keep it as neat as possible, but don't just, take everything down to bare bones.
Mhm.
But I use leaf litter as mulch, and I think it looks beautiful. I think nothing is more lovely than walking through a forest and having the ground just covered with a nice uniform layer of leaves. Something else, though, in addition to the smaller trees to put in there that would really help, I think you could put some of the herbaceous wildflowers in there that would have a
Yes.
lovely spring display.
Yes.
That you'd be able to enjoy in there, and then things that would also continue to stay in there throughout the summertime as well. Foliage would remain, and maybe ferns, things of that nature that you could
Mhm.
sprinkle in there that would make it look more planted and deliberate, and
Exactly.
give them more of a true forest feel.
Yes.
So that might help as well, and relieve just leaves, so it's not just leaves.
Right. Right. Yes. Excellent advice. Yes.
Look for the spring ephemerals as a
Right.
category. The spring
Yeah.
ephemerals, because they work underneath, in the
Yes.
understory underneath the trees.
And I have in the woods behind the house, I've done all that, and I've added a lot of the species. As I pull out the invasives, I've added a lot of the spring ephemerals, like the bloodroot, mayapple,
Mhm.
all those. All of those. Yeah,
Well, stick some of those in your front yard too.
that's what I'm thinking. I'm going to have to do, right?
Yeah.
So my neighbors are happy.
Yeah.
And maybe a
And
few
so-
shrubs. You can
Yes.
tuck a few shrubs in there.
Yeah, I already have a what is it? Viburnum rustifolium in there, that I got from Grow Wild. So that's one of the understory plants in there.
Sweet
And
shrub's another good one.
yes.
Yeah,
So
they're not-
it'll take me a while to develop it, but
Yeah.
I'm
It
hoping the idea works. Yeah.
You'll be surprised how quickly it can happen. Yes, it will take a few years, but that time will go fast when you're out there digging around.
Right.
You'll be amazed.
Some of the native hydrangeas would also do well in there.
Right. The oak
In the
leaf.
understory and the spice bush.
Yes.
And some of the asters will actually go in dappled shade, like maybe on the edge.
Exactly.
And they look nice and neat in the front. They have kind of a mounding look and aren't like, sunflower shape where it's tall and kind of gangly. It's more of a compact, looks almost like a shrub.
Yes.
And those work pretty well.
That's a good idea.
Also, let's see, what Margie said about filling in with some make it a layered look it really works well. So.
Yeah. And if you're putting in some other trees, with those, since you already have some that are already established, you may need to start small with them, smaller perhaps than you would like, so you're not disturbing too much of the roots of the trees around them, and give them a chance to kind of work in with that.
Right.
So going into a place that's already established with big trees, it can be a little tricky. So you may have to start a little smaller than you'd like.
And that's okay, because
they
you
work
can,
better.
yeah, I think that's good advice. I think that's okay, because a lot of the trees that you find online, the native trees, they're usually a foot or two tall, if that. And so I'm used to planting those tiny trees and figuring I'll wait. But they do come up fast. So
They certainly can. They certainly can. Protect them from bunnies
And deer.
and deer.
Deer.
well, I was going to say, when I was listening to everything you were saying, Margie, that I've been here in this location for 8 years, and I've been planting natives ever since I arrived. And I have found it's a true struggle. Like everyone says that native plants do better and they don't require any care. And That's not true for me. I mean, I'm battling the deer, the drought, the rabbits, the possums that dig everything up once if I put it in. So I have planted spice bush everywhere. I don't think I've ever had berries in 8 years. I've got pawpaw everywhere. Never had it flower yet, so all that, but
Yeah.
not that I'm not going to stop, but someday, maybe in 10 years, it'll all start to come
Well,
together.
it's not the native plant's fault that, bunnies and deer eat it, or
Right.
that, other things like come around and dig it up or whatever. But in terms of the spice bush, one thing you might consider, if you are buying them, you're probably buying all females. And spice bush is dioecious.
Yes,
And
yes,
so you have to have a male with
right,
pollen that's going to
Right.
flower too, and
right.
or be close to the wild where they're out there as well. I
Mhm.
had the same problem. I had 2 females and they never set fruit. And so I finally, a friend of mine that everyone here knows, Alan Sweetser, he had some males on his property. And so we went out one day when I was over visiting them and dug up one of the males, and I imported a stud, and hopefully that will help in terms of setting fruit on my females. It's helped a little bit. The male is kind of getting slow. He's slow to start, sluggish right now. Maybe one of these years he'll kick it in gear. But that could be the situation there. And with the pawpaw, of course, you've got to have genetically distinct.
Yes, I've heard that. Yes.
Yeah.
So I've got 9 of them, and they were from all different places. So I'm
Okay. Well, and one thing I don't know that you might want to look at is because if you're starting small with some of these things, what age do they have to be before they
Right.
begin to flower? And
Yeah,
fruit?
yeah.
So that's another thing to consider, because sometimes that can be a few years.
Tim, I had the same problem as you with the deer and the bunnies eating a lot of my trees and shrubs. And I found 2 solutions that have been helping me get them past that intermediate, let them to get up tall enough that they can survive. And they're not as tasty for the deer and the rabbits. They have at some of the hardware stores, Lowe's and Home Depot, they have these tubes. They look like greenhouse material. They're actually, the ones I have are green. I ordered them online, but then I found them at Lowe's. They're tubes that you put around the tree, and it acts like a mini greenhouse, and it grows inside this 4-foot tall tube. And when it gets up to 4 feet tall, you can take the tube off. And another one is there's a spiral stake that I've used on a couple plants, and that seems to work as well.
Oh, okay.
It protects it. That seems like they don't want to bump into that metallic red stake. They look kind of weird it's not as natural looking, but it does get them past that critical stage where they're big enough.
Early on, when I was first putting my garden in, you plop in one little plant and another little plant, another little plant. Well, a bunny comes along, just choop, 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 choop. So if you can get past that first critical stage, like Karen is talking about, where they begin to fill in, then they are resistant or able to cope with that kind of pressure. And now, bunnies are all over the place and around here, much more than they should be. And I can't really tell what damage they're doing, but I know they're doing something. I'll see them out there. So I know they're eating something, but they're not necessarily able to, it's not where, oh no, they just took out an entire plant of phlox. So because I've got phlox now in lots of places and big patches of phlox. So, and I use chicken wire. It doesn't look good.
Yeah, I use it too.
Whatever gets you there,
Yeah. I'll have to send you some of our bobcats, Margie. Takes care of the bunnies real well.
Well,
Their population went.
We do have fox. They're resident foxes around here. I see them trotting through my yard on rare occasion, and lots of hawks. So I think every now and then a hawk will get a bunny. I'll hear that awful cry. I'll know, whoops, there goes one.
Yeah. There's a few more things in the chat. Great presentation from David Dool says, we're lucky to have Margie in Tennessee. Matt Cole says, those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind. Dr. Seuss.
Good advice.
Love that. Thanks, Matt.
I like that.
That sounds awesome, Tim. Bob Davis, deer may well eat your small trees. Yep. Gail Eichelberger, thanks, Margie, a great presentation.
Thank you, Gail.
Bob Davis, dogwoods are an edge tree.
Yes.
Also your red buds and serviceberry.
Hmm.
Yeah, serviceberry. I have to stop and think because I know it by so many names. Monica Pretz says the Tennessee Environmental Council is launching the 2023 Tennessee Tree Day soon. And you can get native trees and shrubs through registering on their website, which is tectn.org. For those of you who look in the chat, you can see it there.
They have a little bare root. And so the trees may be as much as maybe 3 feet. It's just a long straight stick by and large, very little in the way of branching on them, and they're all bare root. So, but they're free. And so it's a good place to at least try and get some. You need to get them in the ground quickly, but yeah, they have their like 10,000 tree day or 100,000 tree day or something like that that they do, try and get trees all over. So yeah, that is a good outlet.
Steve Ford says, I love your presentations and I love your book, Margie.
Oh, thank you very much.
Nathaniel Bass says, do you have any tips for responsible relocation transplant of wild natives? Or barring that, what can I do to invite natives without buying them from a nursery? There are native plant sales and sometimes giveaways, but mostly it's sales with, let's see, we had down in Chattanooga in March and Owls Hill, we have 2 of them up there. Wild Ones sponsors a lot of good plant sales. And if we ever get back to going to the meetings in person, there's a lot of plant exchanging done at the meetings.
Yeah, Perennial Plant Society does that. Some of those may be native. Cedars of Lebanon, in concert with the Wilson County Master Gardeners, they have a native plant sale typically in mid-May. So, I mean, you still have to buy them, but so as far as transplanting things, if you have a private landowner's permission, you could do that. You can't dig publicly. That's against the law, and certainly can't take it out of any kind of land like a park or anything like that. Collecting seed is a very good way to do that rather than dig plants, because you're disturbing soil and then you're removing genetic material from that location as well. But if you were to collect seed, say about maybe 10 to 15% of the seed being produced by a particular plant in an area, and sow those seeds, and you don't have to do anything fancy. Get a flat with some soil in it, some good potting soil in it, and then just sprinkle the seeds in that, water it in, cover it with like a hardware cloth, stick it out under a shrub for the winter time. I mean, these seeds, they germinate on their own after the winter, those that need that stratification. And so a lot of the plants that are sold, like at the Cedars of Lebanon plant sale, Linda Robertson does those, and she grows them in her backyard, and that's what she does. She will just collect the seeds. She will sprinkle that in a flat, cover the flat to keep the things from digging and scraping around in it, and just set it outside. And what comes up, comes up. And that's what she uses. And so that's a very economical way. And I think it would be a whole lot easier to get permission neighbors or other people would let you have some seeds and grow your own.
Yep.
Meredith Klepsch did a she did a seminar, I think earlier this year.
Yeah.
So you might want to look through the video list because she did a very nice seminar on setting native plants. And then we also have 2 comments from Robert and also from Jenna about the Native Plant Rescue Squad out of Knoxville. And it's www.nativeplantrescuesquad.org. So that might also be a source of native plants.
Depends on where you're located, what's going to
Yeah,
work.
yeah, it's out of Knoxville, but that might be, if you're in that area, that might be, and they may have some suggestions as well.
Yeah. That's a good idea. And I'm sure Meredith's presentation, I think that was last year.
It was last year.
But her advice would be good. And I imagine it followed very, very similar to what Linda Robertson does, just set it out.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Rule of thumb of seed collection, take no more than 10% of the seeds from any stem. Take seed from no more than 10% of the stems. From Nick Douglas. That sounds like a good rule of thumb.
Sounds like a very good rule of thumb.
Okay. Well, I think it's time for us to say goodnight. And thank you so much, Margie, for coming. We really, really do appreciate it. And I think this is a delightful way of ending our series for the year. I've started signing people up for giving talks for next year. And I hope I'll have it the first half of the year listed in our next newsletter for TNPS. So,
right. Well, it's been my pleasure. Happy holidays to everybody.
Happy holidays to you too, and enjoy your family and the freshening of your house.
One of these days. It always takes longer than you think.
All right. I'll say goodbye to everyone. Thank you for participating, everybody. Your questions really add to everything that we do because it helps us focus on what you're really interested in. So thank you. Good night, everyone. Have a good holidays series here. That we've got Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah. Oh, all kinds of good eating events. Enjoy.